think the destruction of the environment is the most important issue facing us all, and as a Christian, I believe we have an individual duty to protect the life of this world. What baffles me is that many Christians doubt the importance of protecting what we have been given. I know that at some point I will have to explain to my children why their world is degraded and what I did or didn't do about it.
In Romans 12, the Apostle Paul is talking, and he's talking about the true act of worship. And there he says that we're not to conform to the world, but we're to be transformed by the renewing of our mind, that we're really to have a new, complete different worldview. And Paul says that as we do that, we come into God's good, perfect, pleasing will. So I say that there's three things that every human being should do. One is to discover the one that has created you. Secondly, why he's created you, that his perfect will for your life. And then finally, to do it with the rest of their life with passion and conviction.
Therefore, I'm making a film that presents in Christian terms why we need to save the environment. I need to focus on a Christian engaged in a lifelong battle for the environment, someone who lives in a spectacular location where you can see the ideal relationship between man and nature.
Hey, well.
You must be trying. Good to meet you. Whoops,
Whoa.
There goes the umbrella. That's... I thought it might come in useful in present.
Yeah, well,
good stuff.
we'll see about that.
Cool. If Trey is the man to unite people around this issue, then who is he?
Both sides of my family came west, one in a wagon train, and my great-great-grandfather on the other side came actually on a clipper ship. My family were truly Western people, homesteaders, ranchers. My great-great-grandfather literally had to fight a gunfight to keep his property from the cattlemen taken away from him, and that was one part of it. The other part of it was my great-grandfather on the other side, Grandfather Robinson. He was a circuit preacher. He was actually John Wesley Robinson, and he used to ride a horse from town to town in those days, and he'd walk into an old mining town and he'd take over the honky-tonk piano in the town saloon, and he'd start pounding out old gospel hymns, and he planted churches all up and down through California and Nevada. So I think maybe I got a little of him in me as well. I wanted to do something significant with my life. There was something in me that said, you know, I want to do for others what they did for me. And so I just sort of naturally did, in fact, become a school teacher and worked in that profession for 12 years. It was a great season of time. If I hadn't found ministry as I did, I would probably have always been a school teacher, because I think that's one of the great professions, actually. Right ahead of us there, Will, is Timber Butte.
Well, thank you.
Hi.
Hi, Nancy.
How are you?
Very well, good to see you.
Golly.
How's it going?
Where'd you get your
Well,
hat?
Trey gave it to me on the journey, so I haven't tried it on yet, but
Oh,
there.
wow, that's
I'm
very
now
cool.
a cowboy.
You look like an Idahoan.
Well, I hope so. That's an interesting little creature coming up.
That's Jacob.
So he's a goat, your pet goat, is he?
No, he's a lamb.
He's
Hey,
a lamb?
Jacob. We had a friend who said, well, you know, don't you, that you have a bellwether lamb? And I never had heard of a bellwether lamb. And so what it is that a shepherd will, on purpose, take a baby into the home to be raised with the family, put a bell around its neck, and then when he gets older, they'll put him back in with the sheep. And because he knows the master's voice, he'll bring all the other sheep to the master.
It's actually a term now used for high-level leadership. I think from a biblical perspective, it's someone who, has a relationship with the master, that is the Lord, and will bring others to the Lord.
So, Trey, I've come to Boise to see you, and the reason I've come here is because I'm baffled as to why the environment, which seems to me to be the most important issue in the world, has caused such inaction and pushback from the very people who should be doing the most to preserve the environment.
Yeah, it really doesn't make sense, does it? I have a theory, and I think my theory is right. I lived through the whole thing myself, but I believe it started actually in the 60s. I was in college on the college university campus in the 60s. It seemed like everybody was an environmentalist in the 60s. We all had concerns. But when I was born, the world population was 2.5 billion. By the time I was in college, it was double that. A new book had just come out called The Population Bomb, which scared everybody to death, projecting the world population actually reaching probably 8 billion people, which were about there, and what that would mean to the world, to the earth, and to humanity. And so there was a lot of fear. And at the same time, in 1973, there was federal legislation called Roe versus Wade. Roe versus Wade legalized abortion for the first time in our country. And this created a major uproar. At the same time, and I'm trying to kind of throw this all in one pot, a man by the name Hal Lindsey wrote a book called The Late Great Planet Earth, predicting the second coming of Christ and all the things that were going to happen around that. So there was all this focus on the last days, and there was all this anger towards the neglect of the sanctity of life. And that's where really we started hearing this kind of thought, well, it's all going to burn anyway. The most important thing that we can do is get people saved so they make it to heaven and get raptured, And as a result of that, just kind of neglected and pushed back on the environmental issues. Okay, now, at the same time, some of the major environmental non-Christian agencies were still concerned about the environment. They were also very concerned about population and actually supported abortion legislation. So immediately a division emerged between evangelicalism, and environmental work. And so these two camps just emerged. As a result, those of us becoming pastors and leaders in the church were scared to death to say anything about the environment. Because if we did, our congregations might see us as, liberal. People take it for granted the minute you use the word environment, and I try to use other words, although creation care is fine, but now I kind of don't think, I just want to say it like it is. It is environmental stewardship, and but the minute they hear the E word, they think you're a tree hugger or that you care more about polar bears and seals than you care about human life. And I mean, they jump to those kind of political viewpoints immediately and think I'm a liberal. I'm not a liberal. I believe that a man should be married to a woman. I believe in the sanctity of life. I believe in those issues that are conservative issues. I was raised that way. I think the Bible says it that way. I just try to teach the truth based on the Bible, and the Bible's full of truth.
Yeah.
About it, it's no option. We've been commissioned to care for this earth. Good. Nancy and I came, we actually sat on this hill for almost a year before we did anything and just dreamed and had a vision for it so that we wouldn't waste energy. It has incredible insulation. The windows are like double paned, really high quality windows. We have a gray water system and a black water system for our sewage so that we can actually use the gray water, and it waters, as you can see, the orchard is lower than the house, so by gravity it goes down and waters the orchard so nothing's wasted. Has a solar panel on the roof which heats all of our solar hot water and is also set up, if you see the porch, it's set up for solar panels. It's just that we haven't gotten around to that yet. And the windows in the front are facing south, and so it makes a room that actually heats up even in the coldest day of winter and heats the remainder of the house, as well as we use it to start seeds for the garden in the spring.
And how do you heat the house, the rest of the house?
Well, the house is primarily heated by one wood-burning stove that is high efficiency. So there's not a lot of smoke. You'll come here on the coldest day and you won't see much smoke coming out of the chimney. And yet that one heater, because of the efficiency of the house, will heat the entire house.
And how is this living in harmony with God?
I don't want to live off the land. I want to live with the land. I want to live on the land. I want to leave the land better than it was when I came. And so we're very careful about the things that we do.
You obviously had a pretty intense, pretty steep curve when you became a Christian. Within 2 weeks of becoming a Christian, you were handing out Bibles in China.
I wasn't handing out Bibles. I was sneaking Bibles across the border.
Well, fair enough.
To the underground church,
Yeah.
In those days, we went to Hong Kong. We had an apartment there where we would go and stay and be trained. And we would be given small Chinese Bibles. I had this like Nike bag suitcase and went to a money exchange inside of China at 2 o'clock in the morning, because China was awake all the 24 hours in the city, and dropping this suitcase and picking up another suitcase identical to a contact that would take them into the underground church. And ended up being invited to an underground church meeting later and seeing Christianity like I'd never seen it before. People who knew that they would be imprisoned for their faith, and yet just worshiping, and just a vibrancy and an excitement for Christ that I had never seen in America. And I started reading the Bible for the first time, because what happened was I realized I had access to a Bible my entire life and never read it. And so because of my experience, I said, if these people are willing to, die for this book, I should at least read it. And I started reading it cover to cover, cover to cover, cover to cover. And it changed me. I mean, that's what changed me, because I actually got in touch with the compassionate heart of God. I realized who he was. He wasn't this mean, judgmental God. He was a God of love and mercy and compassion and cared for humanity and was calling me to do the same. In about a year, I ended up in Burma, illegally actually, crossed the border in Thailand, went up through Thailand and crossed into the Karen people. They were undergoing ethnic cleansing by the Burmese government. Just women and children being murdered in these villages. And yet they were so hungry for someone to come in there. And what they wanted from me, because I was a school teacher, was someone to come in and teach English, because they felt it was an access to the outside world. And what I discovered there is, because of their extreme situation, they would go and deforest a side of the jungle to plant rice. And the rain would come, the monsoons would come, wash off the topsoil into the river, pollute the river. And the next year they had to deforest another section so they could have some soil. And it just drove them to this extreme place of poverty. And I remember it was on those, in 2 years I was there 7 times with those people. And my heart broke. My heart broke for humanity, That was really where I saw how the environment and broken humanity connected. And so those things were early on put into me. I think that all of the environmental degradation, the destruction of this world, is being driven by greed. I think it's by people saying, I want it and I want it now, and I want mine. They're not thinking of future generations. They're thinking of themselves. And in that sense, it's a very non-biblical perspective of life. And I think that's, bottom line, that's the issue. It's sin.
In a place like Trey's Ranch, it almost seems like there isn't a problem with the environment. There is natural beauty as far as the eye can see.
It's hard to believe sometimes when you're sitting in a place like this, looking over a vista like this, to really understand that all creation is waning, that there's a lot of problems. And so the message has to go out. The message has to somehow get out to those spheres of influence, that the people that we can communicate with, in my case, Christians, that we all need to get around these issues of climate change, of world hunger, because the first to suffer are the poor. And we know that if anybody's responsible for the poor, it's the followers of Christ.
In other words, the environment isn't just about icebergs melting, trees being chopped down, or species being wiped out. It's about the human and moral consequences of those things, out of which comes a mandate for Christians to act. So we need to bring together Christianity and the idea of environmental stewardship, ideas that have come unyoked. Perhaps the cowboy is where Christian values and the environment meet. The cowboy is a man with strong individual responsibility, skills and values, who lives in balance with nature as part of his code of honor.
They have a certain ethic. I mean, there's big chapters of Cowboys for Christ and organizations where these guys really are followers of Christ, and ethics and morals are important to them.
Paul, nice to meet you, Paul.
Well, nice to meet you.
Yeah, cool.
You're an English guy.
I am, yeah.
You got a cowboy hat on already.
Well,
I gave him that hat.
I see.
Yeah, I outfitted him.
I looked in my closet and I got like 5 extra hats, so we'll have to interview the rest of them. Put the other guys in.
Okay, so Paul, explain what's going on here.
Okay, so anyway, this is based on a real Western event. Because in the old days, they had to go out in the range and they had to catch cattle. They had to doctor them. They had to earmark them. They had to brand them and give them shots and stuff. So in the range, they would go out, 2 cowboys on horses, and the first cowboy would rope them around the head or horns.
Yep.
And the second cowboy would come in and rope the 2 hind feet. And so then they just stretch them out like that. And then, then you have them immobilized and they can go in and do all the work on them and stuff like that.
If the problem with the environment is ultimately a moral one, i.e. its destruction is the consequence of people's behaviour and redounds on other people, then the cowboy's brand of hard moral self-accountability might need to be part of the solution. But the cowboy identity by itself won't cut it. My main question for Trey was, what does the Bible say about the environment? And he answered by giving me 7 Bible studies.
When I first started this whole journey with creation care, one of the first places I landed, of course, most people land in Genesis, but the place I landed was with the Noahic covenant. That is that point at which the flood has receded, Noah's on dry land, and there's the great rainbow, and the Lord speaks to him. And it reads like this in Genesis 9, verse 8. It says, "Then God told Noah and his sons, I am making a covenant with you and your descendants, and with the animals you brought with you, all the birds and all the livestock and all the wild animals." And then he goes on and he says, "I solemnly promise never to send another flood to kill all living creatures and destroy the earth." And then it goes on and it says, "And God said, I am giving you a sign as evidence of this eternal covenant with you and all living creatures." I mean, it keeps going on and on and on, where God repeats this, that this covenant is not a covenant with Noah. It's not a covenant with man. It's a covenant between himself and all creation. The thing that got me was that he's, over and over, in fact, 7 times in a row. I don't know anywhere in the Bible where God repeats himself 7 times. And I think that is important. I think that that's profound in the fact that it's God saying, it's between me and my creation. And he goes on and tells us that we have dominion, that is, that we can eat animals for our own use, but with rules. Dominion comes responsibility. Meat is life, and I gave him as good a life as I could while he was here on the ranch. So now we've got to take care of him and take care of him well. That's stewardship as well, is the responsibility of really doing a good job. So use it all, and it's not just nourishing, but it's actually delicious. Most people go to the market and they buy it off a shelf. They don't, have to go through the process of something that you've fed every day, and they've learned to trust you, and then you go, butcher them. It's not an easy thing. I think of the sacrifices that were made in the Old Testament, and they always use the unblemished, the best, the prettiest, the cutest, basically. And I think they did that because, it was really an issue of, cleansing of sin. You had to get in touch with pain. And I don't know. I'm glad for Jesus that he was the final sacrifice. So we thank the Lord.
Trey's children both live in Boise. Knowing Trey and Nancy's passion for gardening, it is not hard to spot their daughter Kate's house.
I'm very blessed by my kids. Both of them have gardens, they have greenhouses, they have chickens. Both of them have little urban, farms in their backyard. And what we're doing at Timber Butte can actually be done in an urban setting very effectively.
Hi, Will.
Hi, Kate. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Very well, thanks. Cool.
Good to see you.
Yeah, well, lovely to see your house.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's a beautiful yard. So tell me a little bit about this place.
All my herbs are over here. My herb garden and some flowers, but I do most of my herbs right here.
Excellent.
Their son Brooke has his urban oasis a couple of blocks away.
We're on a much, much smaller scale, obviously, than my dad, but we still try to have everything kind of work in a cycle. You look around and everything's very green. In order to make things green, you need fertilizer, and we don't want to use any chemical fertilizers, and so we're trying to kind of produce our own fertilizer. And so we have the chickens, which produce eggs, but also are a great source of nitrogen.
And then this is kind of fun. You just lift it up, and then these are their laying boxes, so it's really convenient to grab the eggs. There's a couple eggs in there.
2 apple trees. The apple trees have been a challenge because we don't want to spray.
Do they have any problems? It looks like
they produce a ton of apples, but the worms, have been an issue. We're still trying to figure that one out.
These are my lettuces, the kale, chard. They're starting to grow a little bit here. And then in here, I have melons growing in the greenhouse.
Influence goes both ways, and like many parents, Trey is influenced by his children.
Trey, you told me that your children were instrumental in helping you become, as it were, a green pastor. Do you want to tell us how that happened, and let's see if they agree with your version of events?
This is my version of the story. Yeah. So the way I remember it, and this was 15 years ago, it was the Gore-Bush election, and we were having a dinner conversation. They were adult children. Brooke was working at a major, outdoor recreation business. Katie was working for the Sierra Club, and was the number one salesman for subscriptions to the Sierra Club here in Boise. I'd raised them both in the mountains, basically, building backcountry trail, and so we all had this love, and not to mention that, but at the ranch itself. I mean, most of their life had been in the wilderness, pretty much, and so I entered the ministry, and like most evangelical American pastors, I'm a Republican and conservative. And we have this discussion around the dinner table. They're over, and we're having this discussion, and they're about the election, and they're saying, we have no one to vote for. And I go, what do you mean you have no one to vote for? Like, we're, like evangelical Christian Republicans, And both of them said, if we vote one way, we're voting against the sanctity of life, and if we vote the other way, we feel like we're voting against the environment, and we're passionate about both things, and so we're not voting. Or they were actually going to vote for Ralph Nader or something because they felt like they could vote, but their vote wouldn't count.
But the whole point was that, I didn't feel like I belonged to a political party. Yeah. I didn't want to belong to a political party because I disagreed with half of the stuff that each of them said. And as a Christian, it was, you had this obligation to vote pro-life, and and that's very important, and it's still very important, and it's, especially after having Ella, it's very forefront. But the environment is also, the sanctity of life, and so you have these two opposing, things that really should be very aligned, and there was no reason that they shouldn't be aligned in my mind, and it was frustrating.
Another thing that really struck me, and this is the Old Testament again, and it's much later in the Old Testament, but something that, it's not directly related to creation, but in a way I think it's the big issue. And this is a point towards the end of the whole era of Hezekiah, and of course very soon comes the collapse of Israel, the northern and southern kingdom. And the Lord speaks through the prophet Isaiah to Hezekiah. It says this: listen to this message from the Lord. This is Isaiah saying this. He says, the time is coming when everything you have, all the treasure stored up by your ancestors, will be carried off to Babylon. Nothing will be left, says the Lord. Some of your own descendants will be taken away into exile. They will become eunuchs who will serve in the palace of the Babylonian king. Now, this is the part that gets me, is that then Hezekiah said to Isaiah, this message you have given me from the Lord is good. And then he says, the king was really thinking, at least there will be peace and security during my lifetime. Now, I say that because I think that's one of the problems we're having today when it comes to this issue of environmental stewardship and creation care. People are thinking of themselves. They're thinking of their own lifetime. They're not thinking of their descendants, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, and what's going to be handed off and left to them. Long as it's okay for me, then I'm good.
Trey's neighbour, Jeff, is a sixth-generation rancher and father of two sons.
His ancestors came here and homesteaded clear in the 1800s and have maintained the land all of those years. The desire, of course, is to hang on to that lifestyle, the cowboy lifestyle, rancher lifestyle, for the sake of the next generation.
So we need a tagger, we need somebody to give shots, and then somebody to give spray.
I'll do the spray.
You want to do the spray? Okay. Got the screwworm aerosol. Let's use this stuff here.
And did you yourself learn all of this with your father? Did he teach you how to do all of this?
Yes, I remember. Yeah, doing the same thing at the same area, same place.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're warm enough.
Here's a passage, again, the Old Testament, but a passage, I don't know, I just never saw it before I became so conscious of the environmental issues and all the places that God commands people, Israelites in this case, that they're to care for their land. And this particular passage is the very end of 2 Chronicles, last chapter, almost the last verses of 2 Chronicles, which is, the final words before the Babylonian takeover and everybody goes into slavery and bondage for the next 70 years. And these are the last verses. Let me just read it and then I'll explain. He says that the few who survived were taken away to Babylon, and they became servants to the king and the sons until the kingdom of Persia came to power. So the message of the Lord spoken through Jeremiah was fulfilled. What was that message? Well, the message was, the land finally enjoyed its Sabbath rest, lying desolate for 70 years, just as the prophet had said. Jeremiah had prophesied, if you don't care for the land, you're going to be taken into bondage. It was like, if you don't take care of this thing that God has given you, this promised land, this incredible place, and you don't, he commanded them to give it its Sabbath rest every 7 years, let the land rest so it could recover and recuperate and be restored. And they didn't do it. And they ignored it. Now, that says to me, there's consequences for not caring for land.
Ella is Trey's second granddaughter. His first, Hope, is 16. When Trey talks about the consequences of not caring for land, he might be referring to some of the experiences that Hope had to suffer.
I was diagnosed with alopecia. It started off as alopecia areata, which is where hair on the top of my head falls out, and then it slowly developed into alopecia totalis, which is where hair on the head and the limbs falls off, and then it ended up turning into alopecia universalis, whereas I lost all the hair on my entire body. It was scary because at the time we didn't know what was causing it. We went to doctors and they were like, well, you're going to be bald for the rest of your life, so get used to it now. And that was really scary. Going into junior high, knowing that I would never have hair ever again, that was awful.
It turned out that Hope's alopecia was caused by her diet, predominantly by overly refined and processed foods. After changing to a diet that was gluten-free, among other things, her hair grew back, despite the doctor's predictions.
But I went to camp and my hair was thick and long, and then I went and I ate pizza and cookies and pancakes, and within the week, I was doing my hair one morning and I did this and I looked and it was just a big thing of hair, and I looked at my friend and I was like, you see what's going on?
How did you feel?
Oh, I cried.
Trey's family are prosperous, well-educated, and have a high standard of living. They're also all Christians, yet none of these things protected them. No wonder that their passion for producing their own food is increasing.
This is the land that you
It is delicious.
It is, isn't it?
As well as lamb, we eat elk shot by Trey on one of his hunting trips.
Well, cheers then. Thank you. Cheers.
Hunting is where Western skills, traditional values, and environmentalism seem to meet. Wild meat is the healthiest and also among the least carbon intensive. A hunter respects and understands his environment and protects it, otherwise the animals won't be there next year.
My dad raised me hunting and fishing and in the backcountry, backpacking and with horses. And obviously I wanted that for my kids. And so a lot of these pictures are taken actually. We used to spend summers in the Sierra Nevada building sections of the Pacific Crest Trail. And so Nancy would be the camp cook and I was on the trail crew working for my old friend Pat Armstrong. And then the kids just ran free. They had their ponies and just lived in the mountains. And so these pictures all just represent such rich and good times that we had growing up as a family.
Trey's a good shot, and his collection of guns includes authentic Colt pistols and Winchester rifles. Though to get to fire them, I have to go through a ritual that all Trey's English guests have to undergo.
Now, so you see that's a little different.
Yeah.
Yeah. You could shoot that a long ways, 200 yards. Okay.
Okay. And then back.
Back, and it's ready to go again. So, okay, and I just poured
So that's
110 grains of black powder in there, right?
Yep.
Okay, now, next thing I've got to get a ball and a ball starter. So next thing, you got to lubricate the patch, which you do by sucking around. Can you imagine? Now, guys are shooting at you while you're doing it. Okay, so it seated it against the powder. So this little cap goes right on that little nipple. It's pushed down. Now the thing's live and ready to go. But you don't want your fingers to get in the way of your sight here. Okay.
Could I seriously lean this on something? Is that a wimping out thing to do, or?
A little wimpy, but you can do it.
Okay.
Lean it on that.
Because I think we've got to hit this in one, basically.
I put a lot of powder in that thing. You got it.
When I started this film, I was in a loose sense a Christian. Every week I go to a church where I am the director of music. I had a sort of organ loft's eye view of Christianity, being present, but having to concentrate on the next piece of music rather than what was going on. But while making this film, I became a committed Christian, and a lot of that came from thinking about environmental matters and God, thoughts which lead to many profound bases: the world, life, meaning, death, renewal. Is it possible that other people would also find in the environment a route to God? In this difficult issue, is there actually a way to discern Christianity in its strongest light? To start this discussion, I asked Trey how he became a Christian.
My wife prayed for me for 7 years to come to know the Lord in a real intimate, personal way,
So she married you when you were, in your terms now, not a Christian.
Yeah, we were both churchgoers. She was Catholic, I was Protestant, raised in church. But it's like, the old saying, just because you live in a garage doesn't make you a car. It's like, neither one of us knew Christ in a personal way. But she had a deeper hunger, And I think part of her deeper hunger was because she was married to me. She needed God. I was busy with my profession. I was just happy to live on the ranch and, build the ranch. And I felt very fulfilled. She was very lonely and she had nowhere to turn but the Lord.
We had no electricity. We had no telephone. We were young and adventurous. And it was pretty rustic. And I became pregnant with Katie. We lived an hour from town. I was just a young girl. I was 22 when I gave birth to Kate. Our closest neighbor was a mile down the road and then one way and then 5 miles down the road the other way. We were very isolated. And I spent a lot of time in solitude. And because of it, it made me really question my faith. And it made me really seek the Lord. And a neighbor moved next door to the ranch that was a mile down the road, and she was an older lady, a Christian couple, and she started doing a Bible study with me. And she just brought the Bible alive for me. And just kind of, in a way, showed me how to pray for Trey. I prayed for Trey for about 7 years, that we could be spiritually united. And God met me beyond my wildest dreams, really. But it was 7 years of me just praying for him.
When you actually say yes to Christ and this Holy Spirit enters, for anyone who's experienced that, that moment you never, ever forget. It's a defining moment in your life. My life forever changed from that moment. It totally changed. They say there's orthodoxy, but then they also say that, if it's true orthodoxy, then there should also be orthopraxy, which means practice. And 2 weeks after I was baptized, in my own pond on the old ranch, I was smuggling Bibles into China to the underground church. And to me, that's what Christianity was. It wasn't lip service. It was, I always thought Christianity was a verb. It had to show action as its state of being. Well, this is, we call this Heritage Hall. And it's kind of the meeting room of the church, like the living room. We've got a fireplace at one end and bookstore on one side and a coffee bar with an espresso and all at this end. And we just really want this to feel like a really comfortable place to come and meet and visit with your friends. It's like a classic bookstore type feel. And this end is one of the oldest stained glass windows in the United States. It came from Plymouth, Massachusetts. In this room here, we have a plaque in there that has the names of all the original church planters that came here to help Nancy and I start the church. Down this hall is an art gallery. We have a lot of artists and have drawn a lot of artists from the community. And in here is the sanctuary.
So this is quite a big place, Trey. Is this a mega church?
I don't really know what a mega church is anymore. It's a large church. It's a large church for Boise, for our city.
How many people come here?
Probably a couple thousand people with their kids and everything on a Sunday morning. But it's a very alive, active church. We really evaluate ourselves more on the activity all week of this place. We want it to be a place. I always said I want a church that's more like a mall than a mortuary,
And you built this essentially yourself. When you came here in 1989, this wasn't here, was it?
We were in 4 facilities in 4 years. Nancy and I actually were the founding pastors. We brought with us from our mother church in California 12 families. Most of them had never been in Idaho before. They just came because they trusted us and believed that we had a vision. I pastored this church full-time for 25 years and then retired and handed off to Trevor.
And so that's a kind of responsibility too. So a few years ago, you're here, you preach every Sunday, you've got all these people waiting to see what you're going to say, and who knows, maybe they want you to toe a certain line, and then you decide that you're going to give a green sermon. So what's at stake? What happened? Tell me about it.
I had prepared for this a long time. It was 6 months in the making before I preached that.
And is that
message.
just 6 months writing the sermon?
No. I actually put together a kind of an undercover task force team made up of people that were working in the environmental field. A lot of people in my church that I knew worked for the Forest Service or the Fish and Game or the Conservation League or different organizations, Parks and Recs Department. People who deeply cared about these issues, and I knew that. I asked them if they would sit with me for, this 6 months and help me think through the snares I was going to, the trip wires that I was going to be hitting so that I could avoid them if at all possible. The other thing I knew is that I had to have in place a plan of action. Like I never believed that you should preach any message without having application immediately. Like I don't tell people to feed the hungry and without having some hungry people for them to feed like that day, And so I knew I had to have it ready, and that was going to take some planning. So I went to the Forest Service and I said, hey, we want to, our church, larger church in Boise, we have a good reputation for a lot of other things that we do. And I said, we want to serve you. We want to go and build backcountry trails or clean up campgrounds or anything that you have for us to do. And there was no recycling in our town here. We're in Garden City, which is a town within Boise. And Boise had some recycling started, but Garden City didn't. It's a pretty poor place. That's actually why we were here. And so we knew that. And I was going to ask people to start recycling. So we had to actually start our own recycling ministry and making it available to the whole community because since the community didn't provide it. So anyway, all that was in place. I worked 6 months to get all that in place. So that morning when I finished that sermon, I could pull the trigger on a plethora of opportunity to go out and express this value somehow. So I get up here, I preach the message, and like I said, I know it wasn't probably the best message I've ever preached, but never in all of my preaching, which was quite a few years, had I ever received a standing ovation for anything. We had 3 services in those days here, filling this sanctuary, and I got standing ovations in all 3. I literally stood here and just wept. I just choked up. I just couldn't believe it. Because I came with such fear and trembling, and then just the relief of the response of the people. I just felt this 1,000,000 pounds come off my shoulders.
And so in other words, your congregation was in a way ahead of you. They were waiting for you to allow them, as it were, to believe these things.
Exactly.
A good Christian philosophy could be to ask, in any situation, what would Jesus do? And then try and think through the answer and use it as guidance. Luckily, the Bible does give us clues as to what Jesus would expect us to do about the environment, because the issue ties in with so many things he talked about.
Right at the very end of Jesus' third year of public ministry. He's on his way to the cross. He's in Jerusalem. It's like one of the very last things that happens is that he's sitting on a hillside overlooking Jerusalem with several of his disciples. And they ask him the question. They go, Lord, tell us what's going to happen. Tell us how this is all going to end, basically. And he says that in these last days, there's going to be like birth pangs. There's certain events, things are going to happen. And because there's going to be an escalation of world violence, there's going to be wars and rumors of wars. He says there's going to be an escalation of natural disasters, earthquakes, and so on. He says there's going to be a breakdown of social and ethical values. There's more sin in the world. There'll be famines. There'll be world hunger. There'll be plagues, and pestilence, and disease, an increase. There'll be an increase, basically, of human suffering. And then he gives 3 parables in a row, all 3 of which are really a picture of the last days and the second coming of Christ. That a master goes away, he leaves his plantation or his estate to a steward, and he comes back unannounced. And based on how that steward cared for his stuff, is how that steward is judged. Then there's one about 10 bridesmaids. Some were complacent, some were unprepared for the second coming, and then he comes and, they're not ready. And then there was the next one was the parable of the talents. Like he gave people, three different stewards, he gave them a certain amount of money or talents. I always think of it as talent, actually gifting, and he goes away. And then he comes back unannounced and judges them on how they used that. I think of people's lives who were given tremendous gifting and tremendous opportunity, and some more than others. And how the Lord, when he returns, is going to say, hey, how did you use the stuff I gave you? Was it used well? Well, anyway, then it goes into Matthew 25 and on down until it comes to that place. I think many Christians are very aware of this passage where he's talking about the separation of the sheep and the goats. I think this is all connected. And he says, but when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all of the angels with him, then he will sit upon his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered in his presence, and he will separate the people as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will place the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left, and then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom that's been prepared for you from the creation of the earth, or the world. And then he says this, for I was hungry and you fed me, I was thirsty and you gave me a drink, I was a stranger and you invited me into your home, I was naked and you gave me clothing, I was sick and you cared for me, I was in prison and you visited me. And then his disciples said to him, Lord, when did that ever happen? Like, when were you ever sick? When were you ever in prison? When were you ever thirsty? When were you ever hungry? And then he said, as you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. Now, I've heard that my whole life. And I just never really thought too much about it until I got involved in creation care. Because what happened when I was involved in the creation care movement, I realized this really isn't just like maybe on the surface, it's about recycling aluminum cans or something. But what the biggest issue is that when the environment goes down, the poor go down first. And I'm telling you right now, a glass of water in today's world, in many parts of this world, is like life. And it's like it has a whole new meaning for me. I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty. You gave me a glass of water. And it's like, in this earth we have water everywhere, but not a drop to drink in many of the parts of the world. And I realized that what he's saying is this is an issue of separation. This is pretty serious. This is what he's calling his people to, is to participate with him, not just go and wait for him to return, as many Christians do. I got saved back in, 95, and I'm just waiting for heaven. It's calling them to participate, and as they participate with him, especially among the extreme poor of this world, they literally are doing it unto him. It's a form of worship. It's a form of true discipleship, of not just letting this all go down and saying it doesn't matter because I'm being unaffected. Because in the end, that's a point of judgment, and that's a scary place to be. The church is called to participate with the Lord in this hour in these ways, in very strategic and functional ways.
Like many churches, Trey's church has a huge outreach program, a free medical clinic, a food bank, etc. In recent years, Trey has successfully tied these existing programs to the environment so that it can piggyback on all the issues it is related to. So now, for instance, the food bank serves healthy, fresh produce grown in the church's 2-acre vegetable garden. Trey's most ambitious ministry is the I-61 Network, a global ministry seeking compassion and justice, which has missions in many countries. So what has I-61 got to do with the environment? Lots, as it happens, as the environment and its destruction relate critically to so many of the world's human problems.
This is I-61 offices in here, the conference room in here. This is my old office, but now...
Your old office?
Yeah, this is Tara's office.
Hi, Tara.
Hi, Will. I've heard a lot about you.
Well, and likewise. Nice to meet you.
Tara's taken my place here as the director of I-61 now, so just
I wouldn't quite say taking your place, but taking the point.
So Trey is essentially halfway through.
Yeah, actually, here, this is a runner's baton.
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly what we did.
And can you tell me what I-61 actually is?
Yeah, our mission is to mobilize and equip churches worldwide for justice and compassion ministry. So that basically means that we train and equip people in all 7 spheres of I-61 in the 7 different world crises. And then we mobilize them, so we really try to equip the churches to go out and do the ministry. And we also want to mobilize the churches who are already doing the ministry. So all over the world, we have a network that's working in justice and compassion areas. Say we've got a missionary in the Amazon who maybe needs help with teaching English or digging a well, and we've got somebody in our network who's been trained. Well, we can send them over there to really minister for a certain amount of time. People who are equipped for that.
So there are these 7 spheres of world crisis. Where would you put the environment in the work that you do?
You know, everyone who's passionate about their sphere seems to think it's the most important, but we really see them all working together, because without the hands-on work, it doesn't work. You know, the environment issues don't progress, and without the education to really bring that upriver change, that doesn't work. Without the spiritual feeding and bringing people to the Lord through it, none of it works. So they really go hand in hand.
We say spiritual deadness is the head because ultimately if people have no sense of spirituality, no sense of a very real God that's in control, they have no hope. When they have no hope, they don't even try. And so everything goes down. Not only that, but then all the immorality and corruptness and leadership, which is another very upriver crisis issue, is corrupt leadership. We know that when a leader, even a corrupt leader, repents really of his selfishness and his greed and has a transformed heart and mind, he leads differently. And therefore, you know, that trickles down the river and things get better. Haiti is a good example. There's lots of countries all over the world where you see real corrupt leadership, and downriver you have devastation.
What would you say to someone, Tara, who said that's all great, but actually I'd prefer a secular system of charity or help or whatever you're providing?
I think, you know, good works done in love of people is great, but to do it out of worship to the Lord is even more eternal.
When we clean up the environment of a man's heart, it transforms the mind. You know, and when the mind is transformed, it sees the world differently, it sees God differently, it sees themselves differently. And it begins then to participate with God in a righteous way. That is the beginning of the solution. Especially in the world of evangelicalism, we would consider evangelism would be, our highest priority, bringing people to know God, to know Christ. And one of the things I've realized, even being an evangelical pastor myself, is that so many things that we do and we say actually pushes people away from God when it comes to this issue of creation. I've heard people say they love the creation more than the Creator. They call environmentalist tree huggers, or saying things that are hurtful to people who are actually looking to creation as a means of understanding God. Then I read Romans 1, verse 18, 19 in that area, and made me really think about that. Because he's really talking about sinful man, which is all men. And he says, but God shows his anger from heaven against all sinful, wicked people who push the truth away from themselves. Then he says this, for the truth about God is known to them instinctively. God has put this knowledge in their hearts. From the time the world was created, people have seen the earth and the sky and all that God has made. They can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power, and his divine nature, so they have no excuse whatsoever from not knowing him. And God has revealed himself through his creation. There's miracles. You look at, the anatomy of a flower, or the anatomy of the human being or an animal. I mean, it's like all these systems working together. I mean, how can you say that's anything but a miracle? And I think as an evangelical, and I would say this to the evangelical world, this is the most powerful point of evangelism I know, is to bring people to know and realize that God does exist. This world is not an accident, and if it's not an accident, they're not an accident. There is no accidents with God. It's all a miracle, and it's all God. And we need to embrace this issue if we're going to be effective as evangelical pastors. And I'm going to guess, you don't measure it. In our old camp, we used to just take a handful. We'd say,
Oh, let's say there's a handful then. Yeah.
Yeah, a handful.
Good.
That would be good. Yeah, and then that's better.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
That looks really nice.
Yeah. So now those rounds, we don't want the coffee to boil now, or it'll just boil over. So we pull it off the. All right. Now, if I pour slow.
It's true. There's no grounds. Could you define your sense of the term dominion?
Well, in a way, in the scriptures tells me as a husband and as a father of my family, in a way I have dominion over my family. But that doesn't mean I abuse them. That means I have deep responsibility for them and their well-being. I need to provide for them. I need to care for them. That's what dominion is, responsibility. We're told in the scriptures that husbands are to be like as Christ is to his wife. Christ died for us. I mean, that's the ultimate sacrifice. That's dominion.
My thought of dominion is responsibility, and maybe even more like stewardship. And how I look at it as a father and trying to be a godly man of integrity is to have that kind of commitment to your family first, your spouse, and your children, and then others, as our society includes that. And then also this creation that we see right here, it also includes that.
And do you think people are obeying that?
No. There are, in a general way that most people, percentage-wise, look at the earth, it's just something to consume, something to cater to their desires, whether it's short-term or whatever. And so consequently, with that mindset, they're really not taking care of it as far as a stewardship. Why, God calls us to be a good steward, whether it's with our families, our children, our finances, and certainly His creation. And if we're not doing that, which worldwide generally we're not, then we're not really doing all that He's called us to do.
Do you have anything to add, Trey?
As people, have this, don't really appreciate creation, they don't really understand it, for one thing, even as Paul had said. And so they say, well, we'd rather extract all the minerals from this area, so we need to cut roads into this area. And they don't value it just for what it is, but for what they can get from it. And to me, that's greed, and greed to me is sin. People have asked me, what's the root? Because if you know the root, what's causing it, maybe you can figure out how to fix it. And I think that the answer might be here in Romans 8, verse 18. Paul again is writing. And he's really talking about this moment when, Christ is coming and he's going to restore and renew all things. And in his second coming. And it says, yet what we suffer now is nothing compared to the glory he will give us later. So he says, for all creation is waiting eagerly for that future day when God will reveal who his children really are. So that's that moment when the separation of the sheep and the goats, as we said previously, that moment of judgment, and God's going to reveal the righteous from the unrighteous. And he says, against its will, that is the creation's will, everything on earth was subjected to God's curse, that is at the fall of man in Genesis. And all creation anticipates the day when it will join God's children in glorious freedom from death and decay. So the creation is actually waiting for this time itself, because that's the point of regeneration and renewal, not just for people, but for the creation itself. This is pretty powerful, actually. For we know that all creation has been groaning as in pains of childbirth right up to this present time. This kind of goes back to the covenant of the rainbow, where the covenant was made not just with God and man, it was made with God and all of creation. Every plant, every animal, every living thing. For this point. And that everybody wins. Everybody benefits.
Trey lives close to Idaho City, site of a vast gold rush in the 19th century, and therefore the place to find the dark side of the Wild West.
This was actually the most populated city or place west of the Mississippi during that time. Idaho City was established in 1862. Gold was discovered here, and men, primarily men, swarmed into this area to just extract whatever gold they could get from this place. And they did it with any means possible, because they had no long-range view. Is all they wanted to was to extract their wealth and leave what was left behind. And of course, if you walk miles and miles and miles in these hills, you will just see slag pile after slag pile of the remnant of just a few, really, years of that operation. The reason all these slag piles are here, like this, and they're everywhere, is that basically they had to remove all the topsoil to get to the gold. And so they took high-pressure cannons. They dammed up the rivers. They brought these huge iron pipelines down that came down into smaller diameters until they had this tremendous pressure, and they just fire them into the hills until there was nothing left but rubble. And in the wash-off, then, they would extract what gold they could find, but leaving this tremendous ecological disaster in their wake. There was no concern whatsoever for what was left behind, or no concern for future generations that might want to come and live in this area.
And will this landscape ever recover?
Well, it's recovering. As you can see, it's recovering. God is a God of redemption and renewal. He restores. I mean, it's a tremendous picture, but I'm telling you, this is 150 years old. And in many ways, I mean, it will, who knows how long before this could ever look natural again. This is the remnant of a people who came to do nothing but get wealthy for themselves, not caring anything about what they left behind. Historically, we call it manifest destiny. It was actually a spiritual attitude, believing that God had given us this nation as Americans to, it was our destiny to own it and to control it. And so we killed the buffalo, we killed the beaver, we extracted all the minerals, we did everything just because we felt we had that right. It was a picture of a total entitlement that's killing this planet today. You would think we could learn from our experience. But when you think about it, that was gold. And today we have black gold, which is oil. One of the mining practices here is they were actually putting chemicals like formaldehyde, into the process, which ended up in the rivers and flowed down and poisoned the rivers. They ruined fresh water. Today we have fracking, and fracking is also damaging our fresh water. And so the question remains, can we learn? Will we learn? Or will we learn too late?
So what to do? How to align vision and action? How can anyone make a difference when the problems are so huge? Trey organised a symposium at his church to bridge the gap between the environment and Christianity, and to show off some of the things his colleagues are doing, such as aquaponics, the water-efficient way of growing food and raising fish at the same time.
From the very beginning, there's been something in my heart, and that is to see the church move out in issues of compassion, justice, and mercy. As Tara said, I'm a builder, I've been building. And that doesn't mean building, we have built. We have a 25-acre, 28-acre campus here of ministry, and that's all good. But it's also building disciples. It's actually building this mindset in people.
Evangelism award for his work in
So when we lived on the old ranch, we had no electricity for a long, long time. This, by the way, is my retirement party for myself. When this symposium is over, I officially retired from vocational ministry after 35 years. This is an heirloom matter. I'm passing this down a generation and to someone I think that has passion and energy to carry this work on. And so I just want to with your affirmation, just to lay hands on her a minute and pray for her. I think this is the right place and the right setting to do this. This is the first eye care seminar, symposium, and we hope this goes on for years to come. So it'd be fine for you other guys to join us. So, Father, I thank you for this woman that, Lord, has just worked tirelessly, sacrificially for actually years here in the context of this work. I thank you for her heart for training. I thank you for her heart for the poor. I thank you for her heart for you, Lord, that her natural reflex action is always to pray. And I just thank you for the purity of her heart and her mind. I thank you for her as a wife and as a mother and as a minister in your kingdom. And so, Lord, it is with great honor and pleasure that we lay our hands on her tonight and ask, Lord, for your blessing on her, that you would empower her and speak to her and minister to her, give her vision, and continue her passion for this work. We ask that you would anoint her as a leader
and raise her up, Lord, as a human being, Lord, that could impassion others to be world changers, one life at a time. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Amen.
At the end of the symposium, Trey and Nancy settled back into their routine on their ranch. And here we can find the answer to our biggest question, whether it's all going to burn anyway, and if so, whether we should care.
As a Christian pastor for so many years, I've heard when we're talking about the last days and as it relates to creation care, from even educated people, I hear this statement over and over again. It doesn't really matter because it's all going to burn anyway. Most Christians have sort of heard that at some point, saying, why should we care? It's all going to burn anyway. We're all just going to get raptured and go to heaven, and so we'll just leave this mess behind. And I don't really think the Bible says that. I think that all the way through the Bible, it calls us to stewardship and concern for the earth that we've been given. But I want to address that because that passage comes out of 2 Peter chapter 3, that statement. And so I want to read it in context, especially in the context of really knowing the character of God, the mode of operation of God, just like how he operates, who he is, what his characteristic. And Peter's writing here about the last days, about the second coming of Christ. And he says, first, I want to remind you that in the last days there will be scoffers who will laugh at the truth and do everything evil, every evil thing they desire. This will be their argument. Jesus promised to come back, did he? Then where is he? Why, as far back as anyone can remember, everything has remained exactly the same since the world first started. Now, I've heard that. In all of these arguments about global warming and all these other things, oh, it's just cyclical, it always happens, nothing's ever changed. I'm telling you, I look at the earth and I'm saying I see some big problems and I see escalation of problems, and I actually see Matthew 24, which is Jesus's description of the end times. I see all that stuff happening. I don't think things are the way they've always been. I think things are moving in a direction towards this moment. I don't know when. I would never try to guess the second coming of Christ, when that would be. It's just that I don't think things are the way they've always been. I think this earth is groaning. I think it's changing rapidly. It's becoming an increasingly less sustainable place to live. Well, he goes on then, and he says, they deliberately forget that God made the heavens by the word of his command. And he brought the earth up from the water and has surrounded it with water. Then he used the water to destroy the world with a mighty flood. And God has also commanded that the heavens and the earth will be consumed by fire on the day of judgment, when ungodly people will perish. Now, you got to look at this in context. God's bringing fire. He brought water the first time. He's bringing fire the second time for the same purpose. And that is to cleanse the earth. The first time we know that it says here that he destroyed the world with water. He didn't destroy the world with water. He destroyed sinful man with water. He restored the earth. He redeemed the earth. He renewed the earth. He gave the earth a second chance. And it says in the same way, he's going to bring fire. But if you read it, it says, and God has also commanded that the heavens and the earth will be consumed by fire, as it was with water, on the judgment day, when ungodly people will perish, same as in the flood. So understand this. It's ungodly man that will perish, not the earth. This is the only earth we're going to ever get, and we're called to be good stewards of it and to care for it. And also, mark this, that he is coming, and there is going to be a major catastrophe on this earth that will rid it of all sin and give it a renewed and a second chance.
It was a really weird day. It was really hot, and the wind was blowing, and Trey had just gotten out of the shower and went into the kitchen to get a drink of water, and there was this flame. I mean, it was 5 feet high, coming down from our neighbors. Just her whole barn was on fire, and I mean, it was intense. And he yelled at me, and we put on our Levi's and boots, and I called 911, but knowing that they're not going to be out there for another half hour, 45 minutes at least.
And so you had to fight the fire yourselves?
Oh yeah, and it was coming down so fast because the wind was blowing like crazy, and it built up a wind of its own because it was such a really fierce fire.
And how did you fight it off? What happened? What did you do?
You know, we always expected that it would happen, and we knew we'd be on our own, and so...
I don't think we expected it to ever be that fierce, though.
Wow.
I mean, that was a fierce fire.
You never know, you know, if you're going to run or if you're going to stand when the fire comes, and
Yeah.
you know, that's kind of a message of life too. But
yeah.
But we were prepared. I had harrowed a big break around the barn and house and everywhere around, and I mowed the deep grass, so we would at least have a chance. We had a trailer always set up with water, about 800 gallons of water and a pump. And so it was hooked to an old ranch truck, and Nancy got in the truck, and I followed with the trailer. I stood on the trailer, and we ran out, just drove out to meet it. And she drove, and I sprayed, got the pump running, and just put out this big, boy, we went through 800 gallons of water pretty fast.
But was that enough to fight the fire? I mean, what happened when the water ran out?
It was enough to hold it until finally one neighbor came and he and myself with a shovel, and then Nancy with a shovel on the other side, continued to fight it. It was a major scramble for about 30, 45 minutes, and finally then help arrived. But
we were
by
praying
then
like crazy. I mean, I was just really praying. Trey and I both, we were just saying, Jesus, you know.
I don't think, this life isn't for everybody, but Nancy and I have always had like common vision for it and a common passion for it. And, I think that really showed up in that moment where we carried off the plan that we already had in place.
And so this plum tree is it's an image of renewal, isn't it?
Well, if you look across this landscape, this was charred, absolutely black. Everything, as far as the eye could see, was just black,
And
we were
less than a year ago, so last August.
Yeah, I mean, it was depressing. You look at these hills, it just looked like you were on the moon. I mean, it was just black, and you just felt like it's gone, it's destroyed, this land has been ruined. And then this spring, it's full of wildflowers, and look at these hills. I mean,
look at this plum tree.
Yeah, this plum tree, and it's a great example because actually this plum tree needed pruning. It had a lot of dead limbs in it. Well, it burned the dead limbs, but it left this piece that's going to bear tremendous fruit this coming fall. And I think that one of the messages for us is that, this earth is the earth. There's not another earth. When he renews, it's here. This is what we get, and I believe that we're called to be good stewards of it.
There's an implication for heaven. Where, in your opinion, is heaven going to be?
Well, you know what? I don't have all those answers, but I know that Jesus came and he ushered in his kingdom, and we say that it's here, but it's not fully here. So there's coming a time where it's going to be far more fully present. But there's times, honestly, where I couldn't say this theologically, but I would say there's times on this land, and beautiful mornings and the sunsets, I feel like heaven's on earth now, when people live in the peace and the harmony of creation.
The question I ask myself the most when it comes to Christianity is what, if anything, of all human endeavour will survive? Our societies, our cities, our films even. Whatever the answer, surely nothing we have ever done or ever will do can compare with this field in Idaho that was burnt to a cinder and then within months regenerated by itself in all its beauty and perfection. Surely we must learn to respect this powerful environment that we live in, for after all it is us who will suffer more than it in the end.
So Trey, here we are overlooking your ranch. A few days ago, we came up here and we looked at this beautiful view, but we saw a problem deep within it. Now we've been on this journey and we've come up here again, and I'm hoping to find the solution. So what is the solution to the environmental crisis that we all face?
I think a great place to look is in the Word, and I think one place is in a letter that the Apostle Paul wrote to the Philippians. And he says this, is there any encouragement from being in Christ, any comfort from his love, any fellowship together in the Spirit? Are your hearts tender and sympathetic? Then make me truly happy by agreeing wholeheartedly with each other, loving one another and working together with one heart and one purpose. Don't be selfish. Don't live to make a good impression on others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourself. Don't think only about your own affairs, but be interested in others too and what they're doing. And I think as I read this, I think that the heart of this is really the heart of the answer. The problem's sin, basically. It's greed. People wanting what they want and wanting it now, wanting it for themselves, not thinking of future generations. But as I read this, I think, this heart of humility that comes through Christ-likeness, this heart that says, I really do care about future generations. I'm not just thinking about my own life and what I need now. Thinking that we could, in fact, unite and come together on these incredible problems that face all humanity right now, and join one heart, one mind, and take these things on with purpose and passion and with hands and feet. We can make a difference. And I think that's the solution.
And if Christians did that, if they acted in concert and came together to work for creation, do you think that would attract people to Christianity?
I know it would attract me. And yes, I believe it would.
Now, back with my family in London, I realise that this film cuts two ways. Yes, I hope it will make Christians care for the environment, but I hope it will also make non-Christians see the value in Christianity.